these other structures, but religion isn't arbitrary. You can't just
Right.
decide what it is. You get people to care
was a
about.
religious movement in the in the BC days. There were times where societies would have these gods, and men would become women, and it would celebrate, abortion and all the things that we're doing. We're just casting it in a different light. But it's the same thing. When you tell me that no, there's something that's in you, but it's not physical, and it's telling you that you're not really a boy or a girl, you're recasting the soul.
Yeah.
And attaching something to it that the soul wouldn't tell you.
Yeah, you're feeding on a narrative and a story and an agency that is beyond your individual. So you can think about it this way. It's pretty simple, like in terms of phenomena, you can get it. It's like a teenager is in a moment of transition, right? A teenager is now no longer a child, is moving away from the parents. And in that moment of transition is the time where you want to cast that being. Right. That's why you'd have initiation ritual. Right. You'd have all these kind of things to kind of say, we're going to take this problem of someone in transition and confused and asking questions, and we're going to give it a direction. And so all of the bar mitzvah is a good example. And so it makes sense that
there's another force.
There's all kinds of things are trying. That's why teenagers are always in the fray, like rock and roll culture or all these things. And the LGBT stuff is just the most recent one, which is like a teenager is confused and then they say, well, we have an answer for this confusion. We can explain to you why you don't know who you are. We can explain to you why you have these feelings that make you feel like you're alienated from your body. And it's totally normal when you reach puberty to be alienated from your body because you're going through such rapid changes that you are in some ways becoming a kind of potential on which a community will then exactly. So that's the moment to get people. It's like in that moment of puberty, you can completely capture people towards something. And so we have to, if we know that, like if we can see it, we have to be able to formulate positive answers. Because this is one of the issues that we have, is that one of the problems that's happened, I think, in North America is that we focus so much on like the individual and everything that we just want the teenager, for example, to just like to figure themselves out. But that's not what's happening when you're a teenager. You're actually looking for allegiance. You're looking. That's why teenagers follow all these weird fashions and all that. They're looking to connect. So we have to find ways to give these teenagers a way to see something beyond themselves and to participate in it. If we don't, someone else will.
So it's interesting because the ones who are now waking up, Generation Z, they're not buying any of this. And they're the ones that I think are going to save the world in the end. They're the hero generation. But we have acquiesced as parents and society. We've acquiesced to the scientists, to the doctors, to the experts, and we just stand there quietly, even though we know the experts have no idea what they're talking about. No idea. And we're seeing now the results of it. And is that because the churches just became irrelevant?
I think it might be in some part because the churches failed to understand the grandeur of what they were holding. And so the other thing that we saw in the late 19th and 20th century is that in some ways the churches became very materialistic. On the one hand, they were like, well, we believe in God, we believe in all this stuff, but we also think that it really is science. Like, but wait. I'm not against science. Right. I'm not saying that science isn't real, but science explains mechanical causes. It doesn't capture meaning.
I think if there is a God, he's the greatest scientist, because this is all math.
Of course.
Okay, but math's not behind all this. Math is how it exists and how it works, but that's not the mind behind the math.
And that's a good way, it's exactly the way of thinking about it, is that humans are a joining of mind and matter, the joining of intention, of will, of agency.
And capital M mind.
Yeah. And so I think that one of the things that happened is in some ways the church or the Christians, they lost sight of what they were holding, like the story, the world view, you could say, that they were holding. And they reduced it to morality and science, basically. But what we have is way more than that. Like the vision that's presented in the Bible and the vision that's presented in the Christian cosmology or the religious cosmology is something like an orienting structure. Right? It helps people understand how to be with others, and how to orient yourself as you move. And if we forget that, then we have this problem, which is that someone else is going to take it from you. And someone else is going to take that from you, because that's actually how we exist. So one of the things we've been trying to do, in the past few years, is say, how can we help people connect again with these things? That's why, what I do on the symbolic world is basically help people see how the stories, not just the Bible, but even like our fairy tales, the different kind of cultural stories that we have, that they are these orienting mechanisms. There are ways to identify with purpose and a group, or, a value, and then orient yourself with others towards that.
So I've often thought, Grimm's fairy tales, they're really grim. The real ones are grim, I know you just redid Snow White, and took all the Disney stuff out of it and made it the real tale. These were simply ways to tell a story to prepare you for life, right? Yeah. In a way you could understand as a child.
Yeah, you didn't even have to understand it. It's like, it really is like how when you train a child in doing something, they don't understand the fullness of what it is that they're doing,
right?
Because they don't have maturity anyways. It's giving them a kind of pattern of being in which to embark. And that's why people often don't understand the fairy tale. They think that the fairy tales are morality tales, but they're not. They're much deeper than that. They really are orienting mechanisms. And so that's one of the things we're trying to do with these fairy tales, is say, can we represent them to the world in a way that will play that role again?
So tell me the story of Snow White. What's important in the actual story of Snow White?
Well, the story of Snow White is really, a lot of the fairy tales, especially these types of fairy tales, they are about transition. So they're really about a child becoming an adult. And so in the story of Snow White, it's a girl, and so it's like there is a kind of coming of age aspect to it. There is, and this is funny because a lot of the Christians, they don't like the fact that the secular people have told them there's a sexual element to the story. The truth is there is, but it's not just a sexual story. But there is an aspect of it which has to do with sexual maturation, which has to do with finding your place in the world, and just in general kind of going through chaos and finding your own identity, right? That basic story trope of you're somewhere, you kind of fall into a kind of confusion and chaos, and then you find your way out and you're in a better place. And that's what happens during a teenage years, by the way. And so the story of Snow White is about that for a girl. Like a young girl who is innocent and beautiful. As she starts to change, she now at first faces all the negative consequences of that. Jealousy from the other women, all these men that are kind of like a caricature of men, that are these little men, that are like this dopey and sneezy or whatever, that they can't be my mate, so they're kind of disgusting, right? These men that, and I have to work, I have to clean the house, and I have to serve these men that aren't, and I don't know what it is, and I've just gone through this kind of chaos where, I'm thrown into this world where everything is changing, and then the story of Snow White is about that image as a kind of death. It is related in some extent to a young girl kind of reaching the age where she starts her menstrual cycle, and then she finds out what it's all about. Like, what is this change for? What is happening? And then she meets the prince. That's what it's for. That's what this whole change was for. Like, you are a little girl, you become a woman, and then you realize it's not just pain and it's not just annoyance. There's something beautiful and powerful that can come out of it, and that's why it ends with the wedding. That's why it ends with like finding the prince. The idea of finding the prince isn't like a ridiculous kind of dream of a little girl. It's like, that's how you make people. That's how society continues. So you don't help children. It's so obvious, isn't it?
It is.
It's like, it's so obvious.
It is.
If you don't help children reach there, then they were going to lose themselves in the forest before they get there.
That is fantastic. Disney has given us this little fantasy that you have to have this big elaborate dress and wedding and everything else, and you're going to be a fairy princess. And I hate that as a dad of three children, three daughters, it drives me out of my mind that's because that's coming from this. It's coming from the Disney, and they've lost everything else.
Yeah, well, right now Disney they basically decided to throw the fairy tales out. They don't want them because what's in them for them is fire. Like they can't touch it. They don't understand it. They just see it through their own little political lens. And so they're making a version of Snow White now. That's one of the reasons why we published this book, was because I found out through the grapevine around 2020, 2021 that Disney was going to put out a version of Snow White live action, and I thought they can't do it. They can't have there's so many things in the story that they can't do because of their kind of weird ideological position. But I thought this is the moment where we need to take these stories back, to take them back, present them beautifully. We're doing it in an amazing way with an amazing illustrator, world-class illustrator, beautiful,
beautiful,
like kind of, let's say, heirloom book, like a treasure, not like a throwaway thing, something you put up on the shelf and you have to ask your parents, can we read Snow White again? And so that's what we want. It's like, let's do this. Because a lot of conservatives, they complain, It's like we complain about the state of culture.
But we don't do anything.
But we don't do anything.
Yeah.
But that's what we want to do.
So, but I think that's changed.
Yeah.
I
hope so.
Yeah, I think so. What other stories are you telling?
And so what we're doing is we're doing 8 fairy tales. So kind of like 8 of the most known fairy tales. And we're doing them in a series. So we're doing Snow White. The next one is Jack and the Beanstalk. It's called Jack and the
Tell me what that really means.
So what I wanted to is I wanted a girl and boy line in the fairy tales, right? So you have a coming of age story of a girl, then you have a coming of age story of a boy. And Jack, that's what Jack is about. And everything is in the story. Once you kind of understand the basic images, you can see what it is. So Jack doesn't have a father. He's with his mother, and they're running out of food. And it's imaged as a cow that's running out of milk. And that's his mother. Like, his mother and the cow are related in the sense that she doesn't have a husband. She's running out of fertility. So is the cow. And so his mom's like, you have to go sell the cow off so that we can have food. But that means death, right? It's like, just like in the story of Elijah and the widow. It's like, well, I'm just going to go and spend my last money, and then we're going to eat the food, and then we're going to die.
Right.
And so Jack discovers seed. So the discovered seed is both his own transformation into a man, but it's also something more. It's also something like, what's seed? Seed is like the pattern of food, right? It's not food, it's just one seed. What is that worth? It's nothing. But if you know what it is, if you understand what it is, you can eat forever, right? And so it's like, it is magic seed, but then seed is magic already because that's what it is. So the rest of the story is about him becoming a man, facing the problems of manhood, right? Goes up the hierarchy, encounters these men that just want to devour him, right? That just want to use their authority and their power to crush him, and he has to find his way through that pattern and find this hierarchy of patterns. That's a way to think about it, right? So he finds the first seed, and it's like, well, what's better than a seed? It's like seed. What does it mean? I don't know what it means. He goes up into the beanstalk, and the first time he gets his bag of gold. That's something. Like in terms of becoming a man, and in terms of understanding what it means to be responsible, what it means to have authority. It's like, if I have gold, I can buy food. That's an interesting idea. I don't need food, right? But I have gold, I can buy food. But then there's a problem, right? That runs out. So what's better than gold? The thing that makes gold. So the next one he gets is a chicken that lays golden eggs. That sounds stupid in the story, but it's like, well, it doesn't matter. Basically, first he finds gold, then he finds the thing that makes gold. If I can have that, then I'm good. I can eat forever, right? And so that's the story of Jack. And the final one he gets is, and that's the one it took me forever to understand, which is that he first gets gold, then he gets a chicken that lays golden eggs, and then he gets a harp. Thinking, what's the relationship between all that? I can kind of see the other ones, right? It's like value, and what I finally realized is that when he gets the singing harp, he's basically getting the pattern of everything. Something like the logos, something like the song of the world, or the music of the spheres, they used to say. Basically kind of being able to perceive the pattern of everything as is in the highest point of heaven, or something like that. And so that is what makes everything move, right? The music that Aslan created the world with, something like that. That's what he's getting.
Right. Talk to me about religious stories or fairy tales, some would say. Jonah the whale.
Yeah. What's going on?
What is going on with it?
But Jonah the whale is it's one of the most powerful stories in scripture. You know, I want to be cautious. Like, I think that fairy tales, for example, in the secular world, are the closest thing to scripture that we have. But they're nothing compared to scripture.
Right.
Scripture is astounding. Like, the story of scripture is astounding. So
Scripture is God's knowledge given.
Yeah.
This is man's knowledge.
it's like a pale reflection. It's like a more embodied, for kids, this is easier to kind of absorb. But some of the images in scripture they're harder to see, but once you see them, it's really astounding. So Jonah, you can think about Jonah as, again, this idea that Jonah is called towards something, right? So think about Snow White, right? Snow White is facing a transition. She's becoming a woman. But how do we do this? So Jonah doesn't want that purpose. He wants his own purpose. So what he has to do, sadly, because of that, he has to fall. He has to go down, he has to come back up. So the story of Jonah, you can think about it as the entire story of humanity. It's like Adam is called towards something, and he's like, no, I want myself. And God's like, okay, well, you're gonna make it, but you're gonna have to go low. Like, you're gonna have to go through a lot of pain and suffering until you finally come to what my purpose is for you. And so that's really what the story of Jonah is. It's a repetition of the whole story of the Bible, right? Because it starts with God calling him, a refusal, and it ends in a city that is saved. That's the story of the Bible, right? It starts in the garden, refusal of Adam, and it ends with the heavenly Jerusalem. It's like a little image of what the whole Bible is about. And there are different images that you can see. The story of Jonah is also a bit of a comedy. It's like everything in the story is kind of upside down. It's kind of not making fun, but presenting things in an ironic way so you understand the message. You can also understand it as a return from the fall as well.
Right.
So you go backwards from death, and then you go back up, and then you go into the city, which comes after the fall, and then after that he goes into the garden with the plants and the serpent. And so it's like this whole structure that follows basically the story of the Bible. It's really astounding.
So what's your background?
Yeah, it's weird. I studied art, and I was always interested in ideas. I became very disillusioned with, let's say, academia quite quickly when I saw, because a lot of the crazy postmodern stuff that we have now in popular culture in the world of art was there,
long
time ago. So all the ideas that are now like bearing fruit.
Where do you think that started? What art period do you think that started? That we're kind of still seeing today.
It really is actually early 20th.
Yeah.
So everything that we're dealing with now was already there in like the first decades of the 20th century. Cubism and Dada are the model for all of postmodern art. Like Dada is basically we've kind of accepted Dada and Surrealism as the worldview that we live in now,
Which is insane.
which is completely crazy.
People will dig up our societies,
And wonder
what the hell was that a building? Nobody will get to this. Yeah, they won't ever think that was art.
Think about it. The very idea, even normal people, like even us, will catch yourself thinking that something that has value is valuable because it's different. That's a very strange way of thinking, by the way. But we think that artists should be different. That artists are always manifesting like a new way of doing things. But that's not how the ancients understood the arts. That's not how the ancient arts were. The artists were celebratory.
And they weren't celebrating themselves.
No, they celebrate their participation in the bigger story, their participation in the state, their participation in the religious tradition. That's what the artists used to do. And now we have this weird idea that artists have to question, that artists are questioned in their things are always deconstructed. And so while I was studying art, I was reading a lot of postmodern philosophy in just reading Derrida, reading Lyotard and all these French theorists. And there was something about it that was kind of breaking me, that was causing insight in me. And at the same time, my brother Mathieu, who wrote an amazing book about symbolism, if you people want to know, he was also kind of in that same question period. So in our 20s, we started discussing and reading and talking, and that's what led me to become Orthodox Christian, which is that I started to see the pattern in the Bible and the pattern in the architecture and in the art and in the music, and thinking, oh wow, this is like, it's like a
the whole package.
Yeah, it's a whole way of being and of seeing. And I started to explore that, all through my 20s and 30s. But it's weird. It's kind of like what you said before about how if we had had this conversation 20 years ago, people wouldn't have understood. Both my brother and I felt like we had found this key way of seeing the world, but that when we tried to explain it to others, they didn't understand it, or they didn't even know what the subject was. Like, what are you talking about? And then, so I continued on my world, becoming an artist and also writing about traditional Christian symbolism, writing about iconography, writing about architecture.
And that's the kind of art you do.
That's the kind of art that I do. I don't do a lot now, but because I've been kind of taken on this weird thing.
So that you were just so people understand, you built altars and
so I make images for churches.
Yes.
That's what I did for many years professionally. Icons, carvings, making croziers for just objects that are used in the church or that are images. And that's what I did for many years, and I wrote about it. I started with a friend of mine, something called the Orthodox Art Journal, where I wrote about the symbolism, but I always knew that it wasn't just about religious art, that it was actually about all stories and all images.
Because that's where this came from, isn't it? It was a way to tell. Thomas Jefferson said something I just absolutely love. If you want people to know what you and your culture was about, embed it in the architecture.
Yeah.
And so that's really what they were doing, was embedding it everywhere, telling the story in as many different ways as you can, right?
Yeah, the architecture is, I really believe, honestly, that architecture is the most important art.
I agree.
Because it tells you what's inside, what's outside. It gives you a relationship to hierarchy. It gives you a relationship to identity itself. And it's completely unconscious. You don't have to think about it. You just realize. And we know that.
It's that feeling when you walk into a place and you're just like, oh my God, yeah, I feel so good here. I just want to stay here forever.
Yeah, exactly.
It comes from the way it was all designed.
And the appropriateness, right? And so it's not like there's one type of, let's say, architecture, one type of space, but there are spaces that are designed to do certain things, right? So, like a den where you're smoking cigars is not the same as a grand hall, where you're going to have a ceremony or something. And so all of this way of thinking is really, and so postmodern architecture is an assault. It is an assault on humanity, and it is trying to reprogram us to understand what is inside and what is outside, and what is above and what is below. Even the modern skyscraper. Think about, in the Middle Ages, or later than that, there were literally rules that said you weren't allowed to build anything higher than the church. In order to establish the right hierarchy, it's like, what's the highest thing? Well, God's the highest thing, and then maybe the civil building will be the other one, and you have this kind of it's embedded in the land, in our perception, in our engagement in space. But when you go into New York, you're like, well, what's the highest thing? It's the banks. We know that it's the banks. It's not the church anymore. They are the ones that rule. And it creates this whole sense of, it shifts hierarchy. And postmodern architecture does that towards the idea of difference or deconstruction or multiplicity or variability. And so we have these buildings that are completely wacky and that are completely wild and trying to actually subvert your sense of inside and outside and your sense. And it makes people sick. Like, it makes you sick.
Have you ever done any research on Rockefeller Center?
I know a little bit about it.
I was hammered for saying that is a temple to man.
Yeah.
and it's all embedded. I mean, I could take you around that and show you everything and say, that's what this means, that's what
I mean,
this
they have a
means.
statue of Prometheus,
Yeah.
like right there,
Right.
outside.
Right, and I'm always amazed that people will walk, I think it's, in its own way, a very beautiful building, a beautiful collection of buildings, but you just walk by it,
Yeah.
and you have no idea that building is screaming to
Yeah.
you. I mean, even Atlas across the street
Yeah.
from St. Patrick's, Atlas holding the world, challenging the church. It's amazing.
Yeah. And the thing that people don't realize, and that's the thing about breakdown, is that at first there's something shiny about it, like this idea of celebration of man. It can look really shiny at the beginning, but what's downstream from Rockefeller Center is strip malls. Like that's what's downstream from and it's like just like with the suburbs, so just like
No, literally underground is the first mall.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it was
so
literally
it's like,
the thing under the grass and the concrete.
yeah. So you can see that, like you said, if we don't celebrate the right things in the right place, then it leads us to breakdown. So someone who could go to Rockefeller Center and say, well, why can't we make things like this anymore? And it's actually because they made this that we can't. Because they didn't understand that if you have to celebrate something that transcends you first, and then everything else can come downstream from that.
Well, they did. They did. It was man and machine and the powerful and the money that came from.
I mean, Atlas and Prometheus, these are all images of their titans.
Yeah, but you walk into the lobby and it originally was kind of a weird ode to science and the machine and Marxism, and it still is the kind of now. It's an amazing thing, but they picked their god.
Yeah,
they picked their god. And it's interesting because Rockefeller said he wanted a purely American architecture, and so he was trying to create American architecture.
Interesting.
Saying that America is about the almighty dollar.
Yeah.
It's about man can do anything, create anything.
Yeah.
You said earlier that this always happens, and it's alerting you to an end. Okay. So where are we on that path? I have not met more people. I'm telling you, it is crazy. I can go anywhere, and especially before the election, a little less now. People are like, well, maybe God gave us a break. But before the election, everybody I know was saying, I think Christ is coming.
Yeah.
Where are we? What are all of these things telling us?
Yeah, I think we always have to be cautious. We don't want to just be screaming fire in a building, but I think that all the signs, and when I say signs, I mean really the things that we've been talking about, they're showing an end. Like they're showing that we're running out. And so
wait, is because we all have this, is that a sign of God to you? Because it's almost, I used to describe it, and I'm not sure this is correct anymore. I used to describe it, when you have something of value, you put an alarm on it, and God gave us rights, and I think that's the alarm. It's almost like a silent alarm going off, and everybody going, something's not right.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Something's about to be taken.
Yeah, I think that's right, but it happens, and this is something maybe that can be useful for people to see, is that we talked a lot about the deconstruction and the decomposition and the breakdown, and that is definitely one of the clearest signs of the end. But there's another sign, which is the opposite. It's something like the compensation for that breakdown. And so what happens is that as things are breaking down, there's also systems of power that are becoming more and more powerful simultaneously. And it looks like a contradiction at the outset, but obviously everybody can see it happen now. Like globalism and its kind of idea of a world government, or however you want to phrase it, is hand in hand with
the destruction,
with like the kind of variety and
Same thing
this
with the-
worship of difference and this worship of. So both of those are happening simultaneously. So we have to be able to watch. So even like in terms of America, I hate Americans. Some might not be happy with what I'm about to say, which is
It's all right, you're Canadian.
if you're not careful and you focus too much on individual rights,
Yes.
right, then you are simultaneously calling upon higher and higher forms of authority because you need an arbiter for those rights. There's no way around it. Usually the way that it would function in kind of any society or traditional society is that all those relationships would be moderated